Greetings in Jesus' name, and thank you to each of you that have already shared. Leaning on the everlasting arms. You know, there's just different times in life where there's not much else left, isn't there? But Jesus' arms, and yet, thinking of some of my own life, those times where it seems like there's nothing but Jesus' arms left are extremely difficult. And yet, in a way, they're also some of the best times, aren't they? And of course, only a Christian will understand that. Did you ever have what you thought was a good idea at the time, and a while later you weren't so sure about it? And I told Dwight, I think Monday, that I'd make sure they don't have to worry about the message this Sunday, and I wasn't sure whether I would be me or someone else. I just didn't want, them needing that on their plate yet. And I wasn't too worried about it, but somehow I think I made about 4 or 5 starts on a message for today, and didn't end up with any one of those, and about somewhere in there I still very much wanted to be a blessing to each of you, but I started wondering if my idea had sort of got away from me, because that's sort of difficult. And probably first, I don't know, maybe you think what I share this morning is a very strange message to share after a week with the experiences that have been in this week. And I guess all I can say is I'm sorry. I could have thought of 10 or 20 other subjects that would have perhaps seemed more fitting. And yet this is what I finally was left with, so I'll just share it, and I hope that God can use it. Thinking back over a bit of the time that at least those of you that have been here a long time, and different times we've traveled down here a bit, and how things have changed and how things are. I just want to say you've been a special blessing to me this week, and seeing you as a church and how you pulled together, and I just bless you for that, and may God bless you. How each was willing to do their part, and like I said, sometimes the difficult times are good times in their way, and I think that's one way that it can be good for a congregation. So may God bless you, and don't lose that just because time removes you from maybe certain experiences. On March 30 of this year, we had a nice spring day, really. It was maybe a bit on the warm side, if I remember right. For us, my in-laws from Tennessee were visiting us. And that evening, it was a Sunday, that Sunday evening we decided to go drive, about an hour and 15, 20 minutes west to probably one of my favorite places in Arkansas. It's called it's Blanchard Spring Caverns there. There's a big spring coming out of the rock. It's just a nice place. So while we were there, we noticed that there was a lot of storm clouds coming in, or that there was storm different places, and some of it looked like it could have been fairly severe. I was a little worried about it raining. It did rain slightly on our way over, but we got there and it was very pleasant actually, and we had a great evening. One thing that's maybe nice or not nice about Blanchard Springs, depending on your perception, is we had almost zero phone service back there, so sort of disconnected briefly. We weren't there super long, couple hours. Well, we came back home to a bit of a changed experience. Wasn't just a huge area. Couple maybe, I don't know, the worst was maybe a mile or two wide by a strip a couple miles long. There had been rather severe hail. I think I saw photos till we got home. There was just a pile of ice. Where our two roofs come together as a pile of ice, and that'd be about that high, just hailstones. And if you look, we have a metal roof. If you looked on that thing, it looked like a crazy man ran around with a hammer for quite a while. And I think they measured hailstones up to 4 inches. Now those weren't perfectly round, but they were very large. And the effect was, yeah, it had a lot of negative effects in our way of thinking about things. And one of the things that was interesting right where we are is the trees had just leafed out decently well. Like I said, it was March 30. And so they weren't fully leafed like summer yet, but they had their leaves out and they were looking nice and green. And that hailstorm pretty much de-leafed the trees, especially just right around the immediate area. Like I said, it was a fairly small area. Right across the road, we had a number of pines, and even those were thinned out tremendously. And the oak trees and stuff right around our house, small sticks, leaves, bits of, just the whole thing just destroyed, really. And it was sort of interesting. I noticed that for a number of weeks afterwards driving, if I'd be driving home, it seemed like we were pretty far into spring, maybe getting into early summer. Then we'd come to this section close to my house, and it looked like spring was starting over again. I mean, it was just all over. And even to this day, you all may not think about it, not knowing it, not having been in your face quite as much as it was in mine. But my wife and I, as we take our walks there along our little county road, I noticed something odd this summer, and that is that the trees have leaves all along the branch. They look sort of furry, if you know what I mean. A lot of times the leaves are sort of on the end of a branch and on the twigs, but those small twigs and stuff all got knocked off, and now there's leaves just randomly everywhere on these trees. And I said something to a friend about how odd these trees look when you stop and consider it, and he said, that's a sign of a traumatized tree. So, those trees did have a tough experience. And like I said, perhaps if you came to my house there in Strawberry and visited me, you wouldn't necessarily think about it. But for someone that knows trees well, for me, having lived there and knowing what the trees normally look like, I can tell you that my trees had something happen to them a bit out of the usual scheme of things. So that brought me to a question, and some of this was from quite a number of years ago. I'd used some of this, so just in case any of you have very good memories. But brought up a question is, how often does a tree die because of having its leaves and branches knocked off in a hailstorm? How often does a tree die? I'm not going to say never. But back to at least what I'm seeing there, at this point, while these trees were traumatized, I think most of them are going to pull out of it. They're growing new leaves, even though there might be random spots. They're growing new twigs, small branches. And I believe they will recover. Maybe a couple experiences would do them in, I don't know. So that brought the next question. How often does a tree die because of losing a branch or larger limb? Again, I would not say never. But some people say we have way too many trees around my house, and probably we do. Maybe I should have cut some of them down, but I'll let somebody else do that now. But I have seen a lot of limbs come down, but generally, unless the tree came with the limb, there was still something there that grew leaves that still functioned as a tree. And a lot of times it's surprising how even when maybe they have 3 or 4 main branches and one does break off for whatever reason, how often the rest of that tree will continue on and sort of compensate. Now, I have had a number of trees die. And generally, by far, the majority of the trees that have died on our place died because of factors from within. Not the hailstorm, not the ice storm. We had one, I think, that was killed by lightning, so you could call that from without. But most of the problems our trees have when they die is two things. There's a bug or something that comes and bores into them, and they start rotting out from the inside out. And a lot of times that tree looks healthy for years and years. In fact, sometimes I don't even realize that there is an issue till suddenly you see that the tree's wilting, or sometimes a hole appears and you see the bark coming off. Generally, the trees die from within. We also had a few others that died because their root system was too shallow. A strong enough wind came along, and they weren't tied to the earth hard enough, and they uprooted in that sense. But generally, trees die from within. The final factor may be a strong wind or an ice storm, but even then they succumbed because of a hollow interior or an insufficient root system. May I suggest to you this morning that what is true of trees is also true of people. What's true of trees is also true of people. For those of us, for someone who has grown up at least with some exposure to truth, rarely, if ever, are the external things the cause of them turning their backs on that truth. It's from things that are going on in their heart, things that they aren't maybe recognizing or working on. The biggest cause of people walking away from truth, and maybe I should say the church as well, are hidden things. They're the things they don't say rather than the things they say. You ever notice that when somebody begins maybe a wrong journey in their life or whatever? Sometimes they have a lot to say, but I would suggest to you that the real reasons for them walking away from truth almost always go unexpressed. They'll point at other things. The reasons they're afraid to admit, possibly even to themselves. The struggles they do not express, the ones that they're afraid to own. And I don't know how to classify some of these things. I'll explain it somewhat my own way. Sometimes there's maybe what we would call emotional damage. Perhaps those around them have done poorly in expressing appreciation for them and the difference they make. Perhaps they have experienced rejection, a lack of being accepted. Perhaps they've just simply become overwhelmed by criticism and negativity. Maybe they felt condemnation without the possibility of redemption. You know, sometimes there's spiritual struggles that can take the shape of bitterness, pride, rebellion, a focus and emphasis on temporal things, values. Maybe it's hypocrisy. Perhaps it's moral failure. What's, I don't know if I should say interesting and sad, perhaps both, is how these things build on each other. Somebody that's struggling with emotional pain will often try to fill that hurt by seeking value and fulfillment in things that this world offers, thereby compounding the spiritual struggle that they face. Spiritual struggles, in their turn, cause even more desperation when they fail to satisfy. For all of us who have tried to fill a pain or a lack in our heart with things that this world offers, if we're really honest, know how empty it is. But yet we still try it, don't we? Spiritual struggles, in their turn, can lead people into all kinds of stuff like the occult, a rebellion culture, alcohol, drugs, sexual perversions. And in watching some people and where they've gone in their life, a lot of them had absolutely no plan on going where they ended up, but they started down this path of not realizing the rot in the heart, not really owning what was happening. And maybe those around them failed to see the signs, failed to speak to that. And now today they're in a place you wonder, how did they get there? Most of us, at least initially, learn of and see God through the lenses of others, through the lives of others. Children, especially, will form their initial view of God through how their parents relate, perhaps their school teacher, older people in their lives that profess to follow Christ. And they will either be attracted to God and his desire for them, or they will reject it. And a lot of times it's simply based on what they see on those who claim to be Christians. And you know what's very sad is if you do a little research is how many people out there who at least publicly made a strong profession and confession for Christ, how many of them have children that have gone completely the other way? I could name some well-known evangelists whose children are atheists today. And I don't know all the reasons. We all know everybody makes their choice. But I propose that a lot of times there's some rot. And when we don't deal with that rot, it comes out in all kinds of places. When parents, others are not what they should be, we don't only have a struggling human relationship, we have a warped and twisted view and understanding of God coming out of that. Often problems in a life are addressed from the evidence side of things. And I think this is another mistake we make. For example, a child who has serious behavior, ongoing behavior issues, may be crying for attention. Now, you will probably have, you likely have heard people speak of things like this where they almost excuse the misbehavior or the disobedience. And I don't want to do that at all this morning. I'm not suggesting that parents, that others don't deal with disobedience, with needs. But let's remember, while we don't excuse the disobedience, let's look beyond the surface of what's going on in someone's life and say, what's the real need here? What is the real need? You know, whenever someone is seeking attention, and there's multitudes of ways to do that, isn't there? Whenever someone is rebellious, whenever there's an ongoing cycle of moral failure, these things come from hearts that are crying out for something. What are they seeking? It is such a temptation to address the visible problem without going deeper. And we fail to address the root. And when we do that, it's like me coming to you and saying, you know what, maybe I was using a nail gun, I used to use those more. I just shot a nail into my arm, and you say, oh yeah, you do have a little cut there, and so you put a Band-Aid with some salve on it and say, now you're good to go. And we fail to see that it takes something that goes deeper. Maybe just give you a bit of an understanding of how this works. We could maybe start with some things that we probably could all admit. I'm not necessarily asking for a public response, but have any of you ever got angry? I'm guessing that most of us have had a moment or two where, looking back, we'd have said, well, we had more than we needed to anyways, right? Maybe some of us can say a lot more than we needed to. So let me ask you this. Do you enjoy the feeling of being angry? As you think back about the time you were, let's say, quite angry, one that stands out to you, is that something you like, I just hope I can be angry again tomorrow? No, it's something we like, no. We don't enjoy it. You don't wake up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to be angry today. What does anger come from? I would say it comes from frustration, inability to measure up, meet my expectations, the expectations of others, and so I let that frustration build. If I don't deal with it, it comes out in anger, right? At least for me, that's one of the primary ways that I have to watch it. So that sort of brings up another one I could use. How many of you have been frustrated? That might be easy to admit. If you haven't, if you're here this morning, you've never been frustrated, I'd say you haven't lived very long, right? Need to experience some life. So frustration, it's not necessarily that I'm here trying to call frustration a sin even, it's how we deal with it. But in thinking about frustration, do you have a calendar at home or on your phone marked out with the days that you plan on being frustrated? Well, no, that would be foolish, wouldn't it? All of us would much rather avoid those days, and if I know that this certain situation or day is going to be frustrating, I probably feel like staying in bed or going somewhere else. Stay away from frustration. It's not something I want. I don't go around looking for the next frustrating day. I'll just give you one I struggle with, and it sort of connects to both of these perhaps. And I'm willing to call this a sin. It's something I struggle with, something I want to grow in. That's impatience. Impatience is something that can seem to hit me hard and often, and when I least feel capable of dealing with it for some reason. And you know, saying all that, impatience is still not something I want to be. It's something that I sometimes have to tell my family I'm sorry about, or others that I work with. And yet it's something that I still do. And as you think of all this package of things, notice how they're things we struggle with, but they're not things that we really desire in and of themselves. And whenever we think of probably any sin you could name, sometimes we want some of it, But hardly anyone wants the full fruit of sin. When we face these things, they're not something we deliberately cultivate. They spring from causes and deeper issues. Most of us would be more than happy to never be angry, to never be frustrated, to never be impatient. And a lot of failure is this way. I'd like for you to turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, and I'll read verse 18 and 19. How shall I say, let me back up a bit. I think I titled this message just Looking Deeper, Looking Beyond the Surface, however you want to word that. You know, if I desire to be a blessing to others, I will need to realize that what I see them be at times and what I see them do sometimes is a result of the turmoil in their heart, not necessarily a delight in what they are and do. This verse in Luke chapter 4, verse 18, I think it's a prophecy out of Isaiah, at least partially, Christ speaking of himself. Luke 4, verse 18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, speaking of Christ, because he hath appointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. You know, John 3:16 tells us that Christ came for anyone that wants to believe in him. Yet I also don't think it's improper to say that he especially came for, and that he has a special place in his heart for those that are poor. I'm going to explain that as those who have needs, those who don't have it all together, those who someday just really admit that it's not working for me. He came especially for the brokenhearted, those facing grief, those facing pain, those facing loss of whatever kind. He came for the captives, those being held in bondage by fear, by spiritual struggles, by ongoing failure. He came for the blind, those that have trouble seeing beyond what they face. He came for the bruised, those that have been battered and beaten by life. Let's go to John chapter 8 now. John chapter 8. I want to read us an account of Jesus relating to a person like this now. John chapter 8, verse 3. I believe he was in the temple at this point teaching. And somebody was brought to him that that very well fit the description and who Christ came for. Let's say it that way. John chapter 8, verse 3. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. In considering this passage, it seems like we often focus on the accusers. We focus on Christ's response to them and possibly to the woman. This morning, I'd like to consider the woman a bit, the other person involved here. And I have a few things I'd like for at least me to think about. The first one are 5 facts that I have, 5 things that I feel the scriptures clearly telling us about her here. There's so much we don't know about her, but here are a few things we do know. She committed adultery. Nobody was arguing about that. She'd messed up. She was somebody's wife. And for that matter, she was someone's daughter. She was guilty of breaking the law. She was caught and held accountable. She experienced condemnation and judgment from the people around her. She was forgiven and given another chance. The next category I have is a few deductions I'd like to make based on what we know. And I know we have to be careful with that, but I feel these are fairly safe. I'm not going to try to go out on a limb here. But based on what I know, and I think what you know about human nature, I believe we could say that this was a woman that was looking for acceptance, for security, for love. Would you disagree with me? For fulfillment in her life. And I'll just say this, I think I'm right. I'm not trying to put it on level with the scripture, but I would say from what I've seen, what I understand of life, rarely if ever does a lady that is loved, secure, and happy commit adultery. They don't really go together. Rarely if ever does a lady that is loved, secure, and happy and finding fulfillment in her life commit adultery. A second deduction. She had not experienced what she longed for in the legitimate relationships in her life. Again, I don't know her history. I don't know who her parents were. We know she had to have parents. Maybe they had died. Maybe she was an orphan. We don't know. Evidently, she was married, at least at some point in some way. But she was not. She had not experienced what she longed for in the legitimate relationships in her life, for whatever reason. The third deduction. She did not know where to find what she longed to experience. She did not know where to find what she longed to experience. Perhaps she thought she knew where it could be found, or she might not have done what she did. But we do know she really didn't know where to find what she longed to experience. Fourth deduction, she was deceived and thought that emotional and spiritual fulfillment could be found in a physical relationship. That's not completely unique to her, isn't it? Is it? I think sometimes I can struggle with that. But she was deceived and thought that emotional and spiritual fulfillment could be found in a physical relationship. When she gave herself to this relationship, the fifth deduction, when she gave herself to this relationship, she found that it only amplified the problems and the pain in her heart and life. Then the sixth. She expected and she received condemnation and rejection for being such a failure. And then the seventh deduction. When she met Christ's love and compassion, it crumpled the walls she had built and she experienced forgiveness and a fresh opportunity. I'd like to read about another woman that Christ related to in John chapter 4. Now please turn to that. John chapter 4. From this story, I'd like to pull a few ways of how we ought to relate to those who are experiencing things like this. How do we go below the surface with those that are having struggles in their life? John chapter 4. I'll start at verse 6. We have Christ and his disciples needing to on a trip. And rather than taking the long way around like I guess the good Jews did, good being in parentheses here in this case, they took the shortcut through the Samaria country. And so he was weary and he sat down at the well. His disciples went to go get some food. So verse 6. Now, Jacob's well was there where they stopped. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well. And it was about the 6th hour, I think we would say the middle of the day. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. Let's skip down to verse 9. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest a drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman said unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with. The well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up unto everlasting life. The woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. Jesus saith unto her, Go call thy husband, and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband, for thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In that thou saidst truly. The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh, when ye shall neither in this mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Ye worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. The woman saith unto him, I know that the Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. Jesus said unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. And upon this came his disciples, and marveled that he talked with the woman. Yet no man said, What seekest thou? Or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot, and went into the city, and saith, somehow I cut that off, but she went into the city, and told the people, Come see a man that told me all I did. Okay, so a couple of points on how to go deeper than the surface. First off is be approachable, be vulnerable, admit your own need. As I looked at this passage, I was blessed by, you notice how Christ opened the conversation with a simple request. Give me to drink. Give me to drink. Maybe that doesn't seem like much. But what was he saying? He was actually asking this woman with all her needs, with all problems she had, I guess we could say, to say, can you help me with my need? Have needs, which we all do. You don't have to go looking for those. Admit your needs. Ask for help with your needs. Then the second thing that Christ did that stood out to me is he didn't fit into her box. And I hope you can follow what I'm trying to say here. I'm not trying to be negative when I say this, but be different than the people around you. Be Christ-like. Can I be even as strong as say, don't just be another Mennonite? You know, the majority of people that are living lives, at least probably that we know, the majority of people will respond to a struggling person in a negative way. Be the exception, be the minority. And the third thing is that he always led her to truth, lead to truth. It seems human nature is given to either condemnation on one side, or perhaps seeking to justify those with sin in their lives, with needs. Let us be presenters of truth, not condemningly, but let's not avoid it or water it down. What exactly are we promoting and standing for? A truth that judges, condemns, and shuns, or a truth that redeems, enlightens, heals, and helps? So don't be judgmental, yet be honest, be forthright. You know, when Jesus told her to go get her husband, he perfectly well knew what her situation was because of his next response. And he was honest. He was truthful. He was forthright. He didn't beat around the bush or try to justify her. Yet at the same time, he seemed to have a kindness. She wanted more. Call sin what it is. Many have tried. Many are trying to lessen the effects of sin by trying to make it something less than sin. This doesn't work. You know, if a doctor wants to help someone with a health issue, they begin by being honest about their diagnosis. They don't somehow pretend you don't have a disease when you do have it. Everyone must, at some point, see sin for what it is. Sin brings despair. Sin brings death. Without this realization, they will never grow. They will never heal. They will only be coping with problems rather than being delivered from sin. Not the too distant past, I was visiting with a man from a little bit north of our community. He had a daughter that was an alcoholic, and he had sent her, I think it was to Atlanta, to a place in Atlanta, and he told me he had spent over $180,000 to try find help for her alcoholism, and she came back, she was worse than when she went. And yet she did find help. And the interesting thing was, it was with someone that didn't charge any money, but they did talk honestly about sin, about alcoholism. You know, it bothers me sometimes in our churches. I think we have a hard time just being honest. Some problems we can be honest with, but others times we sort of run circles around it. We need to be honest. Going on. Remember, when someone in your life, someone you know, is loud and obnoxious, attention-seeking, self-centered and selfish, demanding and unreasonable, critical of others, these are all fruits that show that something is wrong in the root or in the life system of the tree. Do we care enough to go to the root? In asking that question, I do have to admit, people will not necessarily allow you, but do you try? Are you brave enough to try? May I propose to you that our culture, we don't enjoy being vulnerable. We don't enjoy being open more than any other culture. And I think I've lived long enough to tell you that asking tough questions, that being honest about issues doesn't necessarily make you a popular person within some quarters. In fact, I found out that some Mennonites can actually get vitriolic over basically simple questions. You know, I've had my own thing with that. We lived in Paraguay, South America when I was born there, and I was about 11 when we moved from there. And there was a lot of violence, at least a fair amount. Different ones of our neighbors, our next door neighbor had actually got shot. He didn't die from it, but he was shot in a holdup. A lot of thieving and stuff going on. And for a boy that age, 10, 11 years old, it was terribly unsettling. And one of the ways that my insecurity, I guess I would say, not to excuse it, came out was I was just a brat to my one older brother that I worked with a fair bit. Just a brat. I don't know. Those of you here with younger siblings, do you ever feel that way about yours? But my brother definitely, legitimately could have felt that way about me. I threw sticks at him and all kinds of stuff. Just a real jerk. I don't know. I feel bad thinking back. And yet, you know, he was such a blessing in my life, I guess, as later I thought of his testimony as, I don't know, he ever whooped me. He probably should have, and I'm not saying it would have hurt. He could have, easily. But he would just sort of sadly look at me, and I don't know that he even ever talked to my dad about it. And I'm not saying, that y'all are doing wrong if you do something different. But to me, it left a lifelong testimony of how a Christian can act, even when you're being persecuted by just a jerk of a younger brother. You know, there's things going on in my heart that I couldn't sort through, that I didn't understand. Makes me think of a church leader who saw a struggling young person. And he made the comment, and I want to be clear before I tell you what he said, that I wasn't totally in disagreement with him. But perhaps how we go about it is the bigger thing. He saw this one young person. He didn't know them at all. He just saw them at a program. And he made this comment to someone else, is that young person needs dealt with. Yeah, a young person did desperately need help. I actually knew more about that person than he did. But whether you're a parent, whether you're a church leader, whatever you are, let's not neglect or not deal with issues. That's not what I'm saying. But do we take time to see the heart of why what's coming out is coming out? Are we willing to ask the difficult questions rather than just try to change the surface? You know, you probably, I don't know, if you spend much time observing life and people, there's a lot of people together this end of this week. You ever see the person just off by themselves with perhaps don't touch me look on their face? We could keep going. I could give you a whole list of symptoms if you want them. You can come up with your own. Should I just tell you that all these are people that are crying out for someone to care? Someone to share with. Now again, I've lived long enough. I understand not all of them will let you or accept you, and that's okay. But do we try? That's what it comes down to. These people are needing someone to walk with them. Do we just look at the cover and say, there's nothing there, nothing worthwhile? How about these ladies that Jesus related to? I don't know if you could have found more troubled people in his culture or not, but they were pretty desperate situations, weren't they? May I remind you that a tree dies from within. Look for the telltale signs. It seems to me, I want to say this kindly, but it seems to me in our, talking broadly, church settings, we somehow take for granted everybody's doing fine, everybody's okay, until they're not. When that rot starts showing out, it's often too late. It's often too late because we haven't been serious enough. We haven't been caring enough on the journey there. You know, if I wait to take care of my tree until a hollow spot opens at the base of the trunk, I have one or two that way now, that tree is probably beyond recovery. I've got to be aware. If I really value my trees, I'm not living in an orchard, so if an oak tree more or less dies, it's not a big deal. But if I'm a farmer that farms apple trees or something like that, you know, I can't neglect my trees till they're in desperate straits. I'm going to have to be aware and be preemptive. I'm going to have to take care of issues before they are issues. That'd be enough on that. Just part of the reason this subject was on my mind perhaps is a personal conversation I had earlier this week. And I don't know totally what was on that individual's mind. But sometimes we can look at the big situations, perhaps we call them, or the desperate ones, and we wish we could make a difference, and that's great. Don't lose a heart for those. At the same time, let's realize that most times we need to start at home. Start at home. I think it's safe to say that if there's more than one person in your home, then there's a person in your home who at times yearns for someone to share what they face. Is that true? Can I lay aside my own, sometimes I feel overwhelmed with my own burdens, my own struggles, my own things, but am I too selfish to lay that aside and care for my spouse, to care for my children? And children, believe it or not, you wouldn't believe how many parents I've spent time with listening to their hearts who would just long for their children to reach out to them and be there for them. I know when you're young, sometimes people that are a bit older or not so old perhaps look like they don't need what you need, but you know what? Children, your parents need your encouragement and your help and your blessing just as much as you need theirs. And branch out from the home. It says we take care of things at home, that it gives us strength and courage to go further, doesn't it? Another thing I want to say, start at home and then start small. I think so often we can look at big, difficult situations and either wish we could help, or perhaps if we're somewhat responsible for them, we feel completely overwhelmed and don't know where to go. So I would say start at home and start small. And what I mean by start small, do the simple things. Do what you can. You know, in the difficult times of my life, probably the people that meant the most to me were the ones that were just quietly available for me. Hope that makes sense to you. Some people come with a lot of words, and I've been accused of, well, I say accused, probably rightly, I don't mean that in the wrong way, of being somewhat of a word person myself. But you know, there's times in life when words just don't help. But maybe just spend time. Some of you listened to me preach before probably heard this, but years ago, and this is quite a few years ago, I saw a church sign that said children spell love T-I-M-E. And I would propose to you it doesn't stop with children. That church sign made a deep impression on me. Just spend time with each other. And I'm not, again, I'd almost caution you against talking too much rather than talking. Take an interest in their interests. Listen when they want to talk or to share, whoever, whatever age. Quietly just spend time when they want someone nearby. And if they want to visit, yes, be willing to visit. You know, there's some times in life I just absolutely don't know what to say or what to do. And yet just a simple note, thinking of you, or a message can go so much to be such an encouragement to someone when nothing else maybe would really help. In going below the surface, I'll just say this: be a blessing, be a friend, listen, care, share, pray. Be willing to get dirty, to touch the neediest. Did you notice how Christ's disciples were surprised that he was talking to this Samaritan woman of all things? And what a woman. I mean, she'd had 6 fellows at least already. And you know, probably in our culture we'd raise eyebrows about that too, and we know it was Christ, so it's maybe perhaps different than me doing that. At the same time, Christ wasn't scared to touch the neediest, perhaps what we call the dirtiest. Some of you may have read this book, but years ago, it's been a couple years, I think it was in the 80s. There was a man that went through a very difficult time in his life, and he just decided that he's just going to walk across the United States from East Coast to West Coast. And he did some hitchhiking. It wasn't necessarily all walking, as I recall, but the majority of it was. And as he traveled from one spot to the other, he later wrote a book about his experience. And one night as he sort of ambled along with his backpack, not really sure where he's going or what he's doing next, he come to the church and he saw they were having a service. Being a little bit of a hippie, a little bit of a weird person himself, he decided, well, he's just going to go to church, see how church people are. So he come in, and the church was fairly full, and I don't know if he was just being somewhat reactionary to their organization or if there was actually no other place for him to sit. But regardless of his motivation and reasons, he came down the aisle of that church, and he came right up to, like right up in this area, just sat down there with his backpack and sat on the floor and just looked at the preacher as he preached. And I don't know what kind of church this was. I don't know what denomination, but I would almost guarantee you it was an unusual experience for that church to have a hillbilly with a backpack sitting in the front of the church staring up at the preacher from the floor. Do you want to know who preached the best message that day? It was an old brother sitting a couple rows back. He shakily got up with the help of his cane and his neighbor next to him, and he walked up to that man sitting on the floor. And with his creaking joints and worn out knees, he got down beside the hillbilly there on the floor and sat there the rest of the service with his arm around him. I don't know that from the book, I would not have said that person necessarily, the individual with a backpack, ever necessarily became a Christian. But I will tell you, it made a lasting impression on him and his perception of Christians. Trees and people both generally die from within. Are you willing to go below the surface? Will you bless the deepest needs? Could we kneel for prayer?